Hello and welcome to Interabang Chats. I'm really pleased today to have with me Nanci McCloskey of Tin House, one of my favorite publishers. And Nanci is the associate publisher and director of marketing and sales at Tin House. Welcome, Nanci.
Thanks. I'm so glad to be here.
So glad to have you. And excited to talk to you kind of about the books that you have coming out soon. But I thought that maybe to get started, do you want to give us a little bit of background, like a short little background about Tin House? You guys are located in Portland, Oregon.
We are. Yeah, we started in 2006. We were originally a partnership with Bloomsbury Books, not an imprint, a partnership that's very important for my owner to have clear. And we did that for a couple of years and then thought, now we'll go out on our own. And I started in 2008. So I've been here for most of the time that Tin House Books has been around. And it's a dream job. It's a dream place to work. The books that we publish are so extraordinary. The environment, the intelligence, the passion, the enthusiasm of my coworkers is I just think I'm probably one of the luckiest people in publishing.
I think you are too. Um, when I was thinking about talking to you today, I went through your list of books, and man, I forgot some of the great books you guys have published over the years. So it was a really good kind of refresher to me. But I kind of made a little best of list,
Okay, I can't wait to hear.
and I'd be interested to see kind of whether there are also any kind of favorites. I know you can't pick favorites among your children.
Oh, I do. I have a favorite.
Okay, all right. So I'll start out with Morgan Parker's poetry collection, Magical Negro. And I had the really wonderful opportunity to be on the National Book Critics Circle jury for poetry last year. And this book won, and I was so excited. It's so amazing. I have to say that poetry kind of intimidates me on many levels, but I thought that she just has such a wonderful way of mixing humor with really grave and important topics and issues. It just knocked me over. Her kind of capacity to kind of meld these two very different things. So, how did you find her, and is she going to be doing some more work for you?
She is actually, we're putting out a new book in the summer. Other people's comfort keeps me up at night. And I love this cover so much. It's actually her first book. It won a prize and was published by a really, really tiny press. And so we're reissuing it. And Morgan Parker, how did we find her? I can't actually remember how we found her. I think it was through our poetry editor at the time for Tin House Magazine, Matthew Dickman, also a celebrated poet. And we just fell in love. But I don't think any of us were prepared for There Are More Beautiful Things Than Beyonce, what a cultural touchstone this book was going to be. And it it was revolutionary the way that everybody responded to it, and the kind of intensity and fierceness and humor and self-deprecation and vulnerability that Morgan is able to put all on the page is I she's an extraordinary talent.
Yeah, I feel like she's like the poet for the people,
Exactly.
like she's so in tune to current culture that you just she just really feels almost like, someone that you follow on social media, or you're tweeting with or Instagramming with. She's remarkable. Um, Okay, and then we'll go back a little bit further to some of my other favorites. Bitter Orange, Claire Fuller. So
Okay.
I've hand sold this book at the store a lot, and I kind of describe it as a little bit, it reminds me a little bit of Rebecca, you know.
Yes.
It's got this kind of um, gothic kind of atmosphere to it, but it's the relationship between the three characters, I think, that's just so um, fascinating and compelling. And you've done a number of books by Claire, I know. Swimming Lessons by Claire Fuller that you've also published is another one of my very favorites too.
Okay, so tell me, is Bitter Orange your favorite? We always do this. We always ask in-house, like, of the Claire Fuller books, what's your favorite?
I think Bitter Orange probably is my favorite, although she has another book that you guys published that I haven't read yet.
Are in the Summer Days.
Yes.
I'll send that to you.
Okay.
Is this light? Do I look like I'm in prison right now or something?
Yeah, so you do have some stripes.
Okay. I wonder if I could fix that. All right, is that a little better?
Very much. Yes, no more stripes anymore. Yeah, so tell me what Claire's up to. Is she still writing?
Yes, we have a new book. It's called Unsettled Ground. And Entertainment Weekly today did a cover reveal for the book. And for any fan of Claire Fuller, for any fan of literary fiction, this book is going to knock your socks out. I'm stripey again. Hold on.
It's following you, the stripes.
I know. It's a sunny day in Portland. This doesn't happen that often.
Oh.
Yeah, I think it's a step beyond this book. I'm gonna make a comparison that I've never made before, and you will not believe me. It'll sound hyperbolic until you read it, but it feels a little like Marilyn Robinson.
Really?
Yes. And we're going to the printer today for ARCs, Lori, and I'm going to make sure you get one.
And that's fantastic. So when is it going to be published?
Summer 2021.
And remind me of the title again?
Unsettled Ground.
Okay. We'll definitely have that in the queue that goes with this chat so people can pre-order it.
That would be great.
From our online store. That's awesome. And let me see. Oh, so this one is actually I'm featuring it in our newsletter today because it just came out in paperback. Divide Me by Zero.
Lori, not enough people know about this book. Not enough people have read this book, and it is so good. It is so good. Yeah, it's one of my favorites that we've ever published.
So this is a story about a Russian immigrant and her mother and her husband, and I think she has some kids too. It's been a while.
Yes, 2 children.
But the thing that I remember most about it is this just heartbreakingly beautiful love story between her mother and her father. And her mother's a mathematician in Russia. And she moves to America with her after the father passes away. But it's so very moving how the main character really she wants to duplicate that love that her parents had. And she really has a hard time trying to kind of feel satisfied in the relationship that she's in. But it's also a humorous book too, because I don't know. I was a Russian major in undergrad. So
is that right?
I find Russian personalities, especially when you've got like the Russian elderly mother, and it seems that it's so stereotypical, but it does seem like they're all the same. They're like very bossy and very and it's such a smart book because she kind of uses the motif of mathematics to kind of look at her whole life and what's happening in her life with her aging mother and her kind of up and down relationship with her husband
And her lover.
and then these weird kind of like psychic people that she kind of gets involved with.
Yeah.
It's a good book.
When I read that book, it had such a visceral impact on me that for a while it seemed like she was my friend, the character Katya in the book, and I would find myself like with a group of people, and I would be like, oh yeah, one of my friends said this thing, and it was something about, I remember it was a parenting thing about kind of being a cool parent, and it was advice to parents about not being cool. I can't remember exactly. She's so smart, and the way that she can turn a phrase is so brilliant. But I quoted this, and then I was like, oh, that's Katya's in a book. She's actually not my friend, but it has that kind, the intimacy and the honesty in the book is, yeah, it's one of those books that kind of changes the rhythm in your mind as you're reading it and stays with you for a long time afterwards. I felt like I looked at everything a little differently after that.
Yeah, and it's definitely, I mean, she picks up some of like the themes, I think, in a lot of the Russian classic novels about, what is life? What are we looking for? It's a very kind of exploratory, questioning book too. But yeah, wow, that's a great one. That's a great one.
Great. I'm
What,
so glad you read that, Lori.
what's else on my
What do
list?
you think of the paperback cover?
I like the paperback cover better.
Yeah, I think I do too. I loved the hardcover. I'm trying to see if I have a copy. I don't. I loved the hardcover when we first did it. And I thought, oh, this is going to appeal to really smart women and book clubs. But over time, it started to feel more cold to me. And there's something about the paperback cover that I feel brings more the warmth of the story in.
Yeah, yeah, and I could see it definitely being a good book for book clubs because it's it's smart feminine fiction, which I think
Exactly.
there's not enough of actually out there. So that's a good thing. Another of my favorites is Pamela Aarons, and you've done a number of books by her too.
Yeah. Which one's your favorite?
I like 11 Hours a lot.
Interesting.
It's
Okay.
it's really intense.
So intense.
Yeah, I mean it's a slim novel, but wow, it really it's really a punch, and it goes through this woman's pregnancy basically.
And her labor, it's 11 hours of labor, and then it's kind of reflecting back on, she's in a hospital alone having a baby, and having had two children, I can imagine that experience of being in a hospital and just by myself doing this and knowing I have to do this, and the way that the staff interacts with her, the way people help her. She's reflecting on that and reflecting back on her relationships and her friendships, and how she's able to communicate so much in so few words is pretty extraordinary.
And then you guys have, is it one other title by her or two?
The Virgins, and then The Understory, her first book we reissued.
Okay. Yeah. Is she an American writer or is she in?
She is. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I hope she'll have more because she's a really great writer.
I know, me too.
Yeah. Okay. And I think I'm almost done with my
I
top.
love your taste in books, Lori.
But so I'm going to have to admit something here. I'm a little embarrassed to do so because it's been so widely acclaimed, and so I really do want to read it. But Christopher Bea. So I didn't read your latest by him, the self-destruction,
The Index of Self-Destructive Acts,
which was shortlisted for which award? I can't remember now.
National Book Award. It was long listed.
Okay, fantastic. But I did read his earlier book, What Happened to Sophie Wilder. Like, oh man, I must have read this. When did you publish that? Like maybe in like 2012?
Yep.
Feels like a long time ago.
Yes.
But what a clever writer. I
Oh
really,
my gosh, Lori, you're like getting at all of my favorites. That book, I probably read that book 3 or 4 times. In fact, when we brought out Index, so he left us for his second book. This happens a lot for small presses, we're limited in what kind of advances we can do. And Sophie Wilder was pretty successful, and he was interviewed by Terry Gross on Fresh Air, and the reviews were extraordinary. So I get it that he wanted to go to a big house for his second book. But for his third book, he was like, I want to go back to the experience at Tin House. I want to do that again. I know. I love when that happens. And he came to our sales conference with Norton, and he said, I didn't know with Sophie Wilder how good I got it. But when Nanci wrote me over Christmas break to say that she was reading my book for the third time, I was like, I don't think my publicist at my next house even read my book.
Oh,
I love that book. Oh gosh, it's so smart. And you won't be disappointed with Index, Lori.
no, I won't. I just have to like, you know how it is, the stacks, and then you like, they get reshuffled in something that you've been meaning to read. But I was so happy to see it on best of list.
I know.
And
What I was excited to see Don DeLillo saying it's one of the best books he's read.
But that's, I was going there because what I understand about the book is that it's one of these, a little bit like Underworld by DeLillo, right? Like one of these, like books that just like kind of like encompasses the world, like it gets into like everything about life and culture and
media and politics, and yeah, and it's a really fascinating look, and I think a lot of times when it has that kind of immediate relevancy, you could see it's like, oh, this isn't going to age well. The thing is about this book is it's more and more prescient. Like, for instance, one of the ways the main character in Index is a guy who got famous because he called every single election in 2008 when Obama won, but he also called every election in House and Senate. And he used statistics in order to do that. And this became the cultural baby. So these sort of liberal lions on the left are getting smaller and smaller as these kind of more kind of statisticians, mathematical minds are taking more precedence in the world. And what's fascinating about that, of course, is then the Trump election, where all of the polls had it so wrong. And he brings in politics and media and how what we see ourselves as Americans, and then more specifically what's happening in New York. I mean, New York is a character in this book, and you feel it with every page.
That's a very good pitch, Nanci.
All right, good. Doing my job.
I am going to read it. But let's go to kind of the genesis of our discussion today, because when did I first learn about this book? Probably through, so Tin House is distributed through W.W. Norton.
Yes.
And I believe that my sales rep, Joe Murphy, when I was going through your seasonal list with him for the fall, said something like, Tin House is so high on this book, and they're going to reissue it. And it's called Agaat by Marlene Vapnyar. Am I saying her last name?
Okay, right? I have no idea if you're pronouncing it right or I am, but I'm just going to say, I say Agaat. Marlene says Ahat. But that feels too hard to say. And her name is Marlene Vapnyar.
Vapnyar. Okay. It's one of those like Vaughn and new word, Nairkirk.
Yes.
I meant to, there it is. And the cover is beautiful too.
Isn't it?
So anyway, so when I heard that you guys were like so high on this book, I was like, well, I've got to read it. It was, I think I told you, it was one of the most extraordinary reading experiences I have ever had, because the emotional and psychological relationship between these two characters, I'll say it the way the author says it, Ahat, who is this orphaned Black little girl, I think, when she first enters the story, like 5 or 6, maybe.
Yep.
And then the white wealthy Afrikaner woman. Is it Milla?
Milla.
Milla, yes. Um, it's just extraordinary. And the book takes you through this very so intense relationship, and it goes through decades, and how the tables kind of flip on the relationship. And there's a little bit, I think, of I don't know, to me anyway, you'll tell me what you think. I feel like at, Milla definitely has like a savior complex with Ahat. She's kind of, she, in a way, she wants to do something good, but in another way, it's almost like it makes her feel better that she's like, oh, despite all of the racial tension in the 1940s in my country, you know, I'm going to take this this dirty black little girl into my home and raise her like my own. And then something shifts when she becomes pregnant, and suddenly Ahat is like moved out of the house into this um, servant's cottage or whatever, and Milla has her own son, and you really don't know until, at least I found myself kind of thinking, what happened? Like, why did she kind of like turn on this young girl? And for me, there was a lot of suspense, because I thought, because Milla's husband, is it Jacques?
I say Jack. I'm not sure.
Okay, but he's kind of a creep, and he's boozy, and he's violent, and he's abusive, and he's not nice. He doesn't
And
like,
he's not that smart, you know.
right, he's pretty stupid, and he
He's
doesn't like,
handsome and can be charming, but the brains are with Milla.
and he definitely is very against Ahat being like part of their family or in their house. So I kind of thought, oh, did something like horrible happen, and that's why she sent her away? But I don't want to give too much away for this new book that's coming out in just like 2 weeks, which I can't wait. But how did you guys? Well, I guess so. You guys first published it when?
2010.
Okay.
And we're a baby publisher. We probably acquired it in 2008. It was the first acquisition, I think, when I started here. And the agent for this book, Isabel Dixon, loved this book, loves this author. And truth be told, she was like a little itchy about selling it to Tin House. We were a small press without a long track record. Lori, when I tell you that I wrote her and begged for this book with, every bit of earnestness, that I was just naked in my email about how much I love this book, how much Tin House was going to do, what we were going to put behind this. We needed this book, and convinced her finally to let us publish this book. And then things got so exciting. I sent a copy to Toni Morrison and to her agents, who sent it on to Toni Morrison. Within, I'm going to say it was like 10 days. It was something extraordinary. I get a letter back from Toni Morrison to the office saying, thank you for sending this book. It's absolutely mesmerizing. And I remember I was on the phone, and somebody just came up to my office to bring me my mail. And I'm opening this letter. I didn't look at the return address. And I'm like on the phone, like, I can't tell this other author that I'm so excited. I just got a letter from Toni Morrison. So I'm trying to play it cool, but I am jumping up and down while I'm on the phone with this guy. And I hang up the phone, and oh my gosh, we were screeching and jumping up and down. And then I sent the book to Penn World Voices, and the coordinator called me and said, you're not going to believe this, Nanci. Toni Morrison and Marlene von Nierkerk are going to be on stage together in New York. They brought Marlene over from South Africa to be interviewed by Toni Morrison about this book.
So is the interview, is it something that you can like download and watch?
Yes, you can from Penn, but it's excerpted in the book now. So we got also an introduction from Mary Gateskill. Mary Gateskill, when this book came out, wrote this book forum review that I loved it so much that it was a joke in the office because I mean it was months, maybe I'm gonna admit, like it could have been maybe a year after pub, and just every once in a while somebody would catch me rereading this review. I just loved it so much. The way that she is able to capture the psychological dynamics between Mila and Ahat was it was just devastating and so acute that I wrote her a fan letter about this, and we just went back and forth about this book. So when we decided to reissue it, she jumped on board to write the introduction.
That's so great. And I have to say that I think that I think it needs a wide readership because it is an absolutely brilliant, brilliant book. It's every bit as resonant about the racial dynamic in South Africa, which is so applicable to our historical sin here in the United States. Of course, the history is a little different, but just the feelings between the characters, I've never been to South Africa, and I'm not a expert on it by any means, but it felt resonant here as
I
well.
know.
Just
Isn't that interesting?
yeah.
And you know what? I think it was so much less so in 2010. One of my coworkers, Toni Perez, said so astutely, the big book in 2010 was The Help. And when you think about the differences between these two books, because The Help is all about this white savior. And what's different about Agaat and what makes the book so extraordinary is the way that Mila interrogates herself, the way the novel allows her to do you feel like we gave enough recap of this? One of the things I think is important to know about it is, yes, Mila brought in Agat when she was 5 years old, I think, but it spans to 40, 40 years. And at the present day, Mila is dying of ALS. She can only communicate through her eyes. And the only one who's there, the only one who could actually read Mila's thoughts through her eyes is Agat. They've spent these days and time together. And yes, this power dynamic has shifted completely. And one of the opening scenes that I still find so devastating is Mila is completely on her hospital bed, unable to move, and she's trying to communicate with Ahat about these journals. And uh, Ahat walks in and finds these journals, these old journals from 40 years ago, and starts reading them to Mila. And all of her imperiousness and all of her self-congratulatory. But you had been there, you had read these with her, and you kind of agreed with her. You wanted to root for Mila. And then you see this, then you see like what it would sound like to Ahat's ears to hear this, and everything shifts. And I have to say that for me and my own sort of moral development, that was such an important moment and made me kind of interrogate myself differently about, you can take such an easy way out sometimes with these hard questions that feel good and sound good. And then if you dig deeper, there can be some ugliness underneath, and how important it is that we look at that. And I think there's absolutely a reckoning of that right now.
Yeah.
And so in many ways I feel like 2020 is when this book is going to find its audience.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that is interesting what you're saying about The Help, because this is there's not even a comparison, I don't think, but the complexity of the relationship here is just so astutely drawn. It's almost like someone, like you're reading the minds of these two characters and how they go back and forth. And of course, there is this kind of back and forth of the leverage between the relationship between the two women. And a lot of it, at least for part of the book, the kind of the pivot of that is Milla's son, who really kind of looks to Ahat as his mother in a lot of ways, because that's who he grows up playing with. Because I don't know, when he's born, she's like maybe 12.
Mm-hmm.
He's quite young, and she actually has to birth him pretty much.
Yes.
On the road.
Right.
But yeah, and then there's all this bitterness that Milla feels because, why does she have a better relationship with my son than I have? But
And what do you think, Lori, do you think that this was a genuine relationship with Ahat, or do you think this was sort of a screw you to Milla to put a wedge between them?
that's a really good question, because it's hard to it's hard to imagine how painful this kind of exile that Ahat experienced from Milla actually was, because Milla was the only mother she really ever remembered, because she was so young when she was, orphaned and rescued. And, Milla talks about how she was like dirty and she had mites and fleas all over her. And
she had been so sexually abused that she could no longer have children.
right.
But the other really fascinating thing is that Milla, of course, didn't consider is that bringing her into the house then created a wedge between Ahat and all of the other Black slaves on the farm. So then it created this position where Ahat was not part of the family and not part of the slave community, and how alone she must have felt in that.
Yeah. So I think that's a really good question. I think that from the perspective of the son, I think that I felt like his relationship with Ahat was genuine. I think that he really absolutely loved her. And I'm sure that she loved him too. But yeah, there very well might have been some motivation or ulterior motive there for sure.
But it's interesting, the son's perspective too on Ahat. He leaves South Africa, he moves to Canada, and when he thinks of Ahat, he thinks of her, I think he calls her a cyborg. And he I mean, all of the love that he felt for her is still very much alive. You have the sense of that, but just the damage of apartheid, just the damage of these power relations, she couldn't escape it. Where would she escape to? Of course she's going to be impacted. And then he kind of felt as though you have to kind of accept where you are and where you can move with the limited power that she has. And so she allowed relationships that he as like a young man, probably I'm going to say early 20s, then felt like she should have been angrier, she should have left, she should have done these things, which we all do when we're in our 20s. We want radical reactions to things,
Right. Well, and I want to also emphasize that the book is not without humor.
yes.
So Milla's outlook on the world is really laugh out loud funny sometimes. The way that she disparages her neighbors, and she has quite a high opinion of herself for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But that's funny. And then also her husband, who's such a fool in so many ways.
He wasn't a farmer, and it's I mean, you can look at this book in so many different ways, but just another form of the power relationships and the patriarchy. There's this dance that they have to do with other farmers, where Mila has all the knowledge, all the intelligence, has studied this, is
And
passionate about it.
and she inherited the farm from her parents.
Exactly. But because he's the husband, because he's the man, she has to kind of sit back and let him kind of posture as the big guy. But, you know, as she has a big ego, she doesn't let that stand for very many minutes before she kind of subtly undercuts him, sometimes not so subtly.
He throughout the book has a lot of projects that like never, they're all to naught because like he doesn't know what he's doing. And yeah, he's a pretty pathetic character. But speaking of humor, because I love this book so much, I read her other novel.
Oh, Triumph.
Yes. And I don't know how foreign rights work at all. If there's any way for you guys to publish that.
Overlook published it in the US.
But
So I think it's out of print though now, right?
yes,
Yeah.
I had to get like on a, you know, a used book kind of thing, I think from the UK to get
Oh,
it.
wow.
It was extremely well worth it. It's a totally different book.
Yes.
But and it's sad in a lot of ways, but man, that book is very funny. It's kind of it's essentially, you know, these rednecks in if I can say that word, in a suburb of Johannesburg. But it's extraordinary. I think she's only done 2 novels. Um,
She's a poet as well.
yes, she is.
She still publishes poetry. And yeah, I check in with her every once in a while. Like, anything to tell me about projects? And she never answers. She
Yeah,
says, you know, I write slow, Nanci. So
I
she's
think
working.
an essayist too. She's
Yeah,
quite the literary star in South Africa. She just needs to get known in this country.
I agree.
Okay, we're gonna make
I'm
that.
so glad you love this book as much as I do.
I do, and I'm gonna make a lot of people in Dallas read it. So let's talk about what other books. So Ahat is published December 1st. So
Right.
coming, and then what do you guys have on the horizon for early next year?
So January 12th, this big book is coming out called The House of Vesper Sands by Porrick O'Donnell. We found out about this book. It's so interesting how it happened. It was like simultaneously our editorial director, Maisie Cochran, who has been interested in Porrick O'Donnell for such a long time. His book, The Maker of the Swans, came out a few years before. She loved that cover, wanted to know more about it, and tried to get in touch with his agent. And he's just like been on the radar. And then my publisher, Craig Poplars, was in the car listening to NPR, and Helen McDonald was being interviewed, who said, I don't know why Porrick O'Donnell is not published in the US. He's the best writer I've read in so long. I'm not sure exactly the quote, but then Craig and Maisie are essentially calling each other at the same time, talking about the same author. And 3 weeks later, we acquire this book. The House on Vesper Sands is this Victorian mystery. You could think of it as Sherlock Holmes meets Jane Austen. It is very dark, but so funny. And it's also this book written for modern times. One of the main characters is this journalist. Her name is Octavia, I think. You know, the newspaper wants her to be writing society columns and talking about women's clothing and stuff, but there's these murders that are happening. These young women are getting murdered, and she just knows there's this story there and won't give it up. And there's this detective, Inspector Cutter, who just, he has the wryest sense of humor. I mean, you will be like absolutely laughing out loud when you read this. And then there's this Gideon Bliss, who's in love with one of the missing girls, and he gets involved. Every character is fantastic in this. It feels like just what you want to be reading right now on like a cold, dark night. And the attention we're getting is just extraordinary. So I want to give you some comp titles for it, because this is something we think about all the time. And Helen McDonald is a huge fan, but I wouldn't call her a comp for it. But Sarah Perry, The Essex Serpent, is a really great comp. And she read it, loved it, offered a blurb, and she called it, I'm going to get this wrong because I haven't read it. But it's a historical mystery, Crimson and the White Petal. Do I have
Yeah.
that right?
Mhm.
Okay. She said it's the best Victorian mystery since that book. And I feel like people who read mysteries, their eyes light up when you mention that title. And the reads we're getting are just fantastic. It's an Indie Next pick. We have, I think, 23 bookseller blurbs for this one, and 35 much loved on Edelweiss. So every read we've gotten all across the board is excited about this. I think it's going to be a big book. I think it might break out.
And that's January.
Well, and
Okay.
our print run is enormous for it. So fingers crossed it does as well as we hope.
Well, it sounds like the people love mysteries, and it sounds like, like that dark kind of gothic kind of mystery. Yeah. What
It's
better
smart and funny too.
what,
It's just,
what better thing to read in the short daylight of January?
yes, exactly. And then we have this book called The Whispering House that's coming out, Elizabeth Brooks. So this is the second book of hers that we published. We published her first book, The Orphan of Salt Winds, which was an indie bookseller favorite. It just got passed from hand to hand sold like crazy. The library market loved the book. It was her debut. And now this is her second book. And we're so excited. And it's also dark and it's creepy. And it's about this young woman, Freya, whose daughter died, or not daughter, sister died unexpectedly years before. And it haunts her. It haunts her father. And she's at a wedding reception. Her and her father are there. And she feels just a little bit removed from everything after her sister died. And she just is at this reception. She sees this house. It has a name. It's one of those houses in England that has a name, Burn Hall. And there's something about this house that's just like a magnet for her. And before she knows it, she walks over to the house and into the foyer. And there is a painting of a woman that looks startlingly like her sister. And it's so creepy and uncomfortable. And she walks out and she can't stop thinking about it. 2 weeks later, she's drawn back into this house and she meets the occupants. And there's this young, handsome artist who's living there and his ailing mother. And he's taking care of his mother. And they invite her to stay, and it's going to be a couple of days. And she ends up staying longer and longer. And the creepiness just gets more intense. The psychological dynamics between the son and the mother. And then this truth about her sister starts kind of trickling in, and she's so discombobulated. She's so out of sorts and removed from everything she knows. She doesn't know if she's going crazy. She doesn't know who she is anymore. And you just get into this mind, and you'll want to have your doors locked when you read it. It's really good.
That sounds awesome. And that's coming out
in March 16th.
Okay, awesome.
Oh, I skipped one. Bride of the Sea is coming out January 26th. Iman Quota is the author. It's a debut. It's about this couple from Saudi Arabia who are living in Ohio, and they have a daughter, and the marriage breaks up. And the father goes back to Ohio, and the mother stays to raise the daughter. And they're doing okay, trying to co-parent in different countries. But the years go on, and there is something about the mother that feels like the father or his family might just decide to take the daughter. And this creeping anxiety gets more and more intense. And then she just decides, I'm going to run away. And she takes her daughter and leaves. And the rest of the novel is the fallout from that. And the backdrop is the Gulf War, 9/11, immigration, Muslim relations in the US, all of these things, but this story is so intimate and so particular. The author is from Saudi Arabia, was raised in Ohio. This is a story that she knows. These are people she knows. It is really extraordinary.
That sounds really good. Is it a debut?
It is.
And the author, is she still live in Saudi Arabia or is she in the US?
No, she's in the US. She lives outside of DC.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah. What else do I have? Oh gosh, one more I'm going to tell you about. White Magic by Elisa Washuda. This book we also have extremely high hopes for. It's an essay collection. The author's native. She's fascinating. She grew up not really immersed in Native culture, and she's sort of surrounded herself with like cheap facsimiles of what it means to be Native. But this is something that she feels so strongly about, and it's kind of her search for identity and her search for culture and her search for self, and all that's being explored in these intensely honest, visceral, yeah, I mean, my hands were shaking while I was reading it. There's an intensity that she brings to the page that is like nothing I've read. So yes, this is coming out April 27th, and we think people are gonna love this book.
So how many books a year do you guys normally publish, Nanci?
24 now. I know, it's Craig Poplar's fault. We were doing 12 a year, then we went up to 18, and now we're doing 24. It's a lot. We have a small staff.
Well,
yeah, and it's pretty amazing at this stage to really love each and every book that we have coming out and see its potential and be able to pay attention to it and make it special. And I think it's one of the best things about Tin House.
yeah, well, I think you're right on that. But from my perspective as a bookstore owner and a freelance book critic, I'm so thrilled about your curation. I think you guys just do such a phenomenal job. You knock it out of the park every time. It's one of those things that I can't say about very many publishing houses, but there's a confidence when you pick up one of your books because you know that like it's going to be worthwhile to read at the least, and at the most it's going to be another aha. It's going to be the most extraordinary book you've read all year. So it's wonderful.
Thank you. Our editors are the best in the business. I firmly believe that.
I think that's right. Well, Nanci, it was so good to talk to you today.
This was fun, Lori. I was nervous, but you made it easy.
It's easy. Happy Thanksgiving, and I'm very thankful for Tin House Books.
Thank you.
Thank you.